The rain poured down hard on the streets, splashing into puddles that reflected the red and blue glow of market signs. Jarek walked fast, his boots making wet sounds on the metal ground. He had just finished a long cargo run and only wanted a drink and a quiet corner. The back market was loud, filled with shouting traders and the smell of strange food. He pushed through the crowd, trying to ignore the cages on either side of the narrow street. Some held exotic animals, some held people. He kept his eyes forward until something made him stop. A small glass cage stood in the corner, lit by a single dim light. Inside, a girl sat on the floor, hugging her knees. Her hair was silver, falling over her face, and her eye owed a soft violet when she looked up at him. Her wrists were chained, and the thin clothes she wore did little against the cold air. Above her, a sign read in bold letters, "One night only, entertainment companion." His stomach tightened. He had seen things like this before, but something about the way she looked at him made it hard to turn away. It wasn't the look of someone trying to sell herself. It was the look of someone asking for help without words. A drunken alien stumbled near the cage, laughing as he slammed his hand against the glass. The girl flinched so hard she hit the wall behind her. The alien laughed again, pointing at her like she was nothing more than an object. Jarek felt his jaw tighten. Before he even thought about it, he was stepping toward the trader in charge of the cage. "How much?" he asked. The trader looked up from counting credits, smirking at the human in front of him. "For her? One night's rent is 200 credits. You pay, you take her. Return her tomorrow. Don't damage her, or it costs extra." His tone was cold, businesslike, as if he were talking about renting a tool. Jarek knew he shouldn't. This wasn't his fight, but his hand went to his pocket, pulling out the credits. The trader's smirk widened as he took the money, unlocked the cage, and shoved the girl forward. She stumbled, but Jarek caught her by the arm before she could fall. Her skin was ice cold. She didn't say a word as he led her out of the market, away from the noise and the smell of cheap liquor. The streets were quieter as they walked toward his small apartment near the docks. She stayed 2 steps behind him, her head down, holding the chain that still hung from her wrist. Every time someone passed them, she tensed, her shoulders tightening like she expected a blow. When they reached his door, he opened it and stepped aside. She hesitated, looking inside like she wasn't sure it was safe. Finally, she walked in slowly, her eyes scanning the room. He pointed toward the table where a steaming bowl of leftover stew sat. "Eat," he said simply. She stood there for a moment, and then moved to the table and picked up the spoon. Her hands shook slightly as she took the first bite. He could tell she was starving, but she ate slowly, as if afraid she might be punished for eating too fast. He said nothing, just watched from across the room. When she finished, she sat quietly, looking at the chain on her wrist. "You can sleep in the bed," he said. She lifted her head, eyes wide with surprise. He pointed to the small bedroom. "I'll take the floor." She didn't move right away, but eventually she stood and walked to the doorway, stopping to look back at him like she didn't understand why he was being kind. Hours passed. The rain outside turned into a soft drizzle. Jarek lay on the floor with a blanket, listening to the hum of the heater. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps. The girl appeared in the doorway, her hair messy, her eyes wide. She didn't say anything, just looked at him for a moment, then turned and went back to the bed. He almost called out to her, but decided not to. It was near 3 a.m. when he woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he heard it clearly, a soft, broken sob. He sat up, listening. The sound was coming from the bedroom. He got up quietly, pushing the door open just enough to see her. She was curled up under the blanket, tears running down her face, whispering words in a language he didn't understand. Her voice trembled, the words broken by hiccups. She didn't notice him standing there. Something tightened in his chest. He closed the door gently and sat back down on the floor, staring at the wall. She wasn't just some market girl. Whatever had happened to her, it was worse than he wanted to imagine. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but one thing was certain. When the morning came, he wasn't sure he could just hand her back to the trader. The thought of seeing her locked in that cage again made his stomach twist. The night stretched on, and the sound of her crying faded into silence. He didn't sleep much, his mind turning over questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? Why was she here? And why, out of all the faces in the market, had she looked at him like that? By the time the pale light of morning slipped through the window, he had made no decisions. But deep down, he already knew returning her would not be as easy as he thought when he handed over those credits. The pale morning light came through the small window, painting soft lines on the floor. Jarek opened his eyes to see her already awake, standing near the door. She was wearing his old coat, the sleeves hanging far past her hands. The chain was still on her wrist, but she held it like she was trying to hide it. Her eyes met his for only a second before looking away. She stood still, almost frozen, as if afraid he would order her to leave. He pushed himself up from the floor and rubbed his eyes. "You can sit," he said, pointing to the table. She didn't move. Instead, she slowly shook her head and whispered in broken English, "No, go back." The words were quiet but heavy, carrying more fear than he expected. He remembered the deal. He had rented her for one night. The trader would be waiting for her return. It should have been simple. Take her back, walk away, and forget about the whole thing. But now, looking at her, something stopped him. The way her hands gripped the coat, the way her eyes darted to the door every few seconds. It was as if she thought someone was coming to drag her away. "What's your name?" he asked. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "Saria." The name was soft, almost musical, but her voice made it sound like a secret she didn't want anyone else to know. Jarek sighed and decided to take her back anyway. It wasn't his business, and he couldn't afford trouble. They walked through the busy streets toward the market, the noise growing louder as they approached. Saria stayed behind him, clutching the coat tighter with each step. When they reached the trader's stall, Jarek found the cage empty. The trader was sitting on a stool, counting credits. Jarek stepped forward. "Here. I'm returning her." The trader looked up with a crooked smile. "Too late. She's already been sold for tonight." Jarek frowned. "What are you talking about? I still have her." The trader leaned back, grinning. "You don't understand. When you rent one, it doesn't mean they stop taking other offers. She's got a buyer lined up for tonight, and let me tell you, she won't be coming back after that." Something cold settled in Jarek's stomach. "What do you mean?" The trader shrugged. "Some buyers like their toys broken. Some don't bring them back at all. That's the business. You had your night. Now hand her over." Jarek looked at Saria. She was standing a few steps back, her eyes fixed on the ground, but her hands were trembling and her shoulders were tense. She already knew what was going to happen if he left her here. He turned back to the trader. "Not happening." The trader laughed. "Not your choice, human. She belongs to the market. You want her for good? Pay the buyout price. Otherwise, get lost." Jarek felt his jaw clench. He didn't have the kind of money the trader was hinting at, but walking away wasn't an option anymore. He stepped back towards Saria. "Come on." The trader stood, his voice hardening. "You take her without paying, you'll be hunted. The syndicate doesn't like thieves." Jarek didn't answer. He led Saria out of the market and into the narrow side streets, moving fast. She followed closely, her steps quick and silent. Only when they were far enough from the noise did she finally speak. "You? Help me?" Her voice was uncertain, like she couldn't believe it herself. He glanced at her. "Looks like I already am." She shook her head, her eyes filling with fear. "No, not help. Save. They kill me." He stopped walking, staring at her. "Kill you? Why?" Saria hesitated, then looked away. Not supposed to be here. They take me. I run once. They find me. This time, no run again." Her words were broken, but he understood enough. She had been taken against her will, maybe from her homeworld, and now she was nothing more than property to these people. If she was telling the truth, the buyer wasn't planning to keep her alive for long. Jarek cursed under his breath. "You need to tell me everything. Who are you really?" But she shook her head, her lips pressed tight. "If I tell, you die too." The words were like a knife in his thoughts. Whatever her story was, it wasn't just about a runaway slave. There was more, something dangerous enough to kill for. They reached his apartment again, slipping inside before anyone could see them. He locked the door and checked the street through the small window. No one seemed to be following them, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Saria stood near the heater, holding her hands over the warm air. Her silver hair caught the light, and for a brief moment she looked almost peaceful. But then she turned to him, her face serious. Tomorrow, too late. If they take me, no more me. He leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He couldn't just rent her again. That would only delay the problem. There was only one way to make sure she was safe: buy her outright. But the thought of the price made his stomach twist. He didn't have the money, not even close. And yet, as he looked at her standing there in his coat, watching him like he was the only shield she had left, the choice became painfully clear. Whatever it cost, he wasn't going to let them take her back. Jarek sat at the edge of the table, staring at the empty cup in his hands. The sound of rain hitting the window filled the room, but his mind was somewhere else. Across from him, Saria sat quietly, knees pulled to her chest on the chair, watching him like she was trying to read his thoughts. Every now and then, her eyes flicked to the door, as if she expected someone to burst through at any moment. He knew he couldn't keep her here without a plan. The market trader had made it clear, if he wanted to keep her, he had to buy her. And the way the man had smiled when he said it told Jarek that the price would be more than he could easily pay. But time was running out. If she was taken by tonight's buyer, she wouldn't survive the night. He stood suddenly, grabbing his jacket. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone. She didn't ask where he was going, but her eyes followed him until the door closed. The city was alive with the usual chaos. Vendors shouting, speeders rushing by, the smell of smoke and metal in the air. Jarek moved through the streets quickly, heading for a part of the district he usually avoided. His contact lived there, a man named Drek who knew every illegal trade on the planet. If anyone could tell him who Saria belonged to and how much it would cost to get her free, it was Drek. Drek's place was a mess of wires, broken machinery, and flickering screens. The big alien sat behind a table, his 4 eyes moving in different directions as he tinkered with the device. When he noticed Jarek, he grinned, showing sharp teeth. Haven't seen you in months, pilot. What trouble are you in this time? Jarek didn't waste time. I need information. A girl, silver hair, violet eyes, named Saria. She's in the market. Drek's grin faded, and his eyes stopped moving. You're messing with syndicate property. That's not just trouble, that's death. Can you find out who owns her? Jarek asked. Drek leaned back, his voice low. She was taken from a war zone 2 years ago. Her homeworld's still fighting. The syndicate claims she owes a transport debt, but that's just a lie to keep her chained. They've been passing her between traders to avoid anyone paying the full buyout. Jarek felt his stomach twist. What's the price? Drek laughed bitterly. For you, 10,000 credits, minimum. Maybe more if they think you actually care. Which, judging by you asking me this, you do. It was worse than he thought. He didn't have even half that amount. Still, he left Drek's place with his mindset. If he couldn't pay in full, he'd find a way to bargain. By nightfall, Jarek was back at the market. The neon lights reflected off wet pavement, and the crowd was as thick as ever. He walked straight to the trader's stall. The man looked up from his chair, smirking. Back already? Couldn't get enough of her. Human? I'm renting her again, Jarek said, dropping credits on the table. The trader raised an eyebrow. Twice in a row? Getting attached is dangerous. But he took the money and shoved Saria toward him. She stumbled, her eyes wide when she saw him. When they were far from the stall, she whispered, Why you take me again? He glanced at her. To keep you alive one more night. Her steps slowed. One more night, then gone. She looked at him, her voice trembling. Next owner will kill me. No mercy. The words hit him like a punch. He stopped walking. Then I guess I have no choice. I'm going to buy you. She stared at him like she didn't believe what she heard. Buy? Forever? He nodded once. Forever. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. Her hands gripped his sleeve like she was afraid he'd change his mind. Back at his apartment, she sat on the edge of the couch while he paced the room. He didn't tell her about the price. He didn't want her to know how impossible it seemed. But he knew one thing. He wasn't letting her go back to that cage. That night, as she finally drifted to sleep, Jarek sat near the window, staring out at the rain. He thought about the parts of his cargo ship he could sell, the risky runs he could take, the debts he could collect. It would cost him almost everything he had. It might even cost him his ship, his only means of making a living. But when he glanced back at her, curled up with his blanket pulled to her chin, he already knew the decision was made. Whatever it took However dangerous it was, he would pay the price. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, Jarek left again. This time, he didn't stop until he reached the scrapyard on the edge of the city. The owner owed him a favor, and Jarek was ready to cash it in. He spent hours pulling valuable parts from his own ship, stripping it down until it was barely spaceworthy. By the time he was done, his hands were covered in grease, and his credits pouch was heavy. But still not enough. He found more buyers for the rest of his spare equipment, bargaining hard and taking less than it was worth just to get the credits fast. Every sale felt like he was tearing pieces out of his own future, but he didn't stop. By evening, he had almost everything he needed. As the twin moons rose over the city, Jarek returned to his apartment. Saria was waiting by the door, her eyes filled with worry. "You come back," she said softly, as if she hadn't been sure he would. He managed a small smile. "I said I would." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Why you do this?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because you deserve to be free, and because I'm tired of watching people like them win." Her eyes shone faintly in the low light, and for the first time since he met her, she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "If you buy me, I am yours, forever." Jarek didn't know if she meant it as a promise or a warning, but he knew one thing. By tomorrow, she would no longer belong to the syndicate. Jarek walked through the market with a heavy bag of credits in his hand. The night air was thick with smoke from cooking stalls, and the neon lights reflected off the wet ground. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight of the credits, but because he knew what this meant. Once he handed over the money, his ship would barely be able to fly, and his future would be uncertain. But he kept going. He had already made his choice. The trader was in his usual spot, lounging in his chair and drinking from a metal flask. When he saw Jarek, he grinned slowly, like a predator spotting easy prey. "Back again, human? This your third night in a row. Either you're richer than you look, or you've got yourself a problem." Jarek placed the bag on the table with a dull thud. The trader's eyes narrowed, then he leaned forward and opened it. The glow of credit chips filled the space between them. 10,000? Jarek said flatly. The trader chuckled, picking up a chip and flipping it between his fingers. "You actually did it. Sold half your life, I bet." He counted the chips slowly, dragging out the moment. "Well, she's yours now, no returns. And when they come for her, remember, you're the one who bought trouble." Jarek didn't rise to the bait. "Where is she?" The trader called out to someone in the back. Footsteps approached, and then Syria appeared, her wrists still chained, her silver hair falling over her face. She looked thinner than before, and her eyes widened when she saw him. For a second, she just stood there, frozen. The trader unlocked her chains and shoved them into Jarek's hands. "Congratulations, human. She's all yours, but you'd better keep her hidden. Syndicate won't like this one bit." Jarek put the chains in his bag and held out his hand. Saria hesitated, then stepped forward and took it. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. Without another word, he led her out of the market. The streets were quieter now, but Jarek still kept to the shadows. He could feel her eyes on him, studying him. Finally, she whispered, "Why?" He glanced at her. "Because you deserve to be free." Her steps slowed, and she looked down, her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. "No one ever said that to me." They reached his apartment, and once the door was locked behind them, Syria walked to the couch and sat down slowly, as if afraid it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Jarek set the bag of chains in the corner, then went to the small kitchen. "You hungry?" She didn't answer, just watched him with those violet eyes. When he brought her a plate of food, she hesitated for a moment before taking it. This time, she didn't eat slowly out of fear. She ate like someone who knew she wouldn't be punished for finishing. After she was done, she sat back, holding the empty plate in her lap. "You lost much," she said quietly. "Maybe," he replied, leaning against the counter. "But I've lost worse before. This time, it feels worth it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time since he met her, she gave him a small, shy smile. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make him realize he wasn't just protecting her anymore. He cared about her in a way that made the risk seem smaller. That night, the rain outside tapped against the windows, and Jarek worked on repairing what was left of his ship. Saria sat nearby, watching, occasionally asking questions in her broken English. He explained the parts to her, and she listened carefully, like every word mattered. When it grew late, he told her to take the bed. She hesitated, then stood and walked toward the bedroom. Halfway there, she stopped and looked back at him. Jarek, I am yours now. Not because you pay, because you choose. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving him staring at the door long after it closed. He didn't sleep much that night. His mind was on the traitor's warning. When they come for her, you're dead. He knew it wasn't just talk. The syndicate didn't let property slip away without making an example. But when morning came and he saw her still asleep in the bed, safe and breathing peacefully, he knew he would face whatever came next. He had bought her freedom, and no one was going to take it away. The morning was quiet, but it felt like the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Jarek sat at the table, drinking bitter coffee, while Saria stood by the small window, watching the street below. Her hair caught the sunlight, glowing silver against the shadows, but her eyes were tense. She wasn't looking at the view. She was scanning it, like someone expecting danger. Without turning to him, she spoke in a low voice. "Ships come, not from here." He frowned, setting down the cup. "What kind of ships?" She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Hunters." Jarek's stomach tightened. "Bounty hunters?" She nodded once. "They know I am here. They come fast." He stood and moved to the window. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just traders unloading goods and locals moving through the street. But then he noticed 3 dark ships hovering low at the edge of the district. They were sleek and armed, the kind of vessels that didn't land unless they had a reason. "How do you know they're here for you?" he asked. Saria walked closer, her voice trembling just slightly. "Because I am not just a market girl. I am daughter of Miria Lan, leader of the Velari resistance." The name was familiar. Jarek had heard whispers about the Velari, an alien people fighting a bloody war against syndicate control. Their leader was a ghost story to some, a hero to others. "If they know you're alive," he began. "They want me dead," she finished for him. "If I die, my people lose hope." He stared at her for a long moment, realizing just how much trouble he had invited into his life. But the thought of handing her over didn't even cross his mind. "Then we make sure they don't get you." She shook her head. "If you keep me, you die too." "Maybe," he said, "but I'm not letting them take you." The rest of the day, Jarek prepared. He checked the blaster hidden under the floorboards, reinforced the door, and made sure his ship could launch in minutes if needed. Saria helped silently, moving with quick, practiced hands. She knew how to seal a hatch, how to set up a simple alarm by the windows. It was clear she had been on the run before. By nightfall, the atmosphere in the apartment had changed. The hum of the heater was the only sound, and even that felt too loud. Jarek sat by the door, weapon in his lap, while Saria stayed close to the shadows. It was just past midnight when the first sign came, a faint vibration through the floor. Then, soft foots outside. Jarek motioned for her to stay back, moving to the side of the door. A heavy knock came, followed by a deep voice. "Open up, human. We know you have her." Saria's eyes went wide, but she didn't make a sound. "You've got the wrong place," Jarek called back, keeping his voice steady. The voice outside chuckled. "We don't make mistakes. Hand her over, and we'll let you live." Jarek could hear the sound of metal shifting. Someone was unlocking the panel on the door's security lock. He raised his blaster, his heart pounding. "You'll have to come in and take her," he said. The door hissed open an inch before he slammed the emergency seal button. Steel plates dropped into place, locking it again. That bought him a few seconds, but the pounding that followed told him they weren't going away. "They'll break it," Saria whispered. "Then we leave," he replied, already grabbing a small bag and shoving supplies inside. She hesitated, then followed him out the back window into the narrow alley. Cold night air hit them as they ran, their footsteps splashing through puddles. Behind them, the sound of the front door breaking echoed down the street. Jarek led her through winding paths, past flickering street lamps and piles of rusted scrap. Every corner they turned, he expected to see one of the hunters, but for now, they were still ahead. Finally, they reached the spaceport. His ship sat in the far corner, patched together and missing more than a few pieces since he'd sold its parts. It was barely flight ready, but it was all they had. He opened the hatch and pushed her inside. "Strap in. This might get rough." As soon as the engines roared to life, lights flashed across the docking bay. The hunters had arrived. 3 of them, weapons drawn, sprinted toward the ship. Jarek gunned the thrusters, the ship lifting shakily off the ground. Blaster fire streaked past the hull, rattling the thin armor. Saria gripped the seat, her voice urgent. "They will follow, always." "Not if we can outfly them," he said, pushing the engines to their limit. The ship shuddered, warning lights flashing, but the stars began to blur as they shot into the sky. For now, they were free, but he knew this was only the beginning. The ship shook as it cut through the dark sky, alarms beeping in the cockpit. Jarek's hands moved fast over the controls, trying to keep the engines from overheating. Behind them, 3 hunter ships followed, their sleek shapes glowing under the faint starlight. Each time one fired, red beams streaked past the hull, making the metal groan. Saria sat strapped into the co-pilot seat, gripping the harness so tightly her knuckles were pale. Her eyes were fixed on the radar screen, where 3 red dots refused to disappear. "They're getting closer," she said in a tense voice. "I can see that," Jarek replied, twisting the controls sharply to the left. The ship dipped hard, nearly throwing them from their seats as they slid between 2 large cargo freighters. The hunters hesitated, forced to pull back to avoid a collision. It bought them a few seconds, but not enough to escape completely. Smoke began to seep from one of the side panels. Jarek cursed under his breath. "We've lost secondary thrusters." Saria didn't panic. Instead, she unbuckled herself and crawled to the panel, opening it with quick, practiced hands. Sparks flew out, but she didn't flinch. "I can reroute power," she said, her fingers moving over the wires. "You know ship systems?" he asked in surprise. "I grew up in war," she answered simply, twisting 2 wires together. The alarms quieted slightly and the ship's speed picked up. "Go now!" Jarek pushed the throttle, and the stars stretched as they made the jump to high speed. The hunters followed, but the sudden burst of speed put distance between them. Even so, Jarek knew they couldn't keep this up forever. After several long minutes, Saria pointed at a blinking mark on the nav screen. "There, Nebula Sector. They can't track inside." It was risky. Dense clouds of ion gas could mess with their systems and even disable the ship completely. But if it blocked the hunters' scanners, it might be their only chance. "Hold on," Jarek said, steering toward the swirling mass of orange and red that filled the viewport. As they entered, the ship's lights flickered, and static filled the comms. The radar went blind, showing only a mess of noise. The hunters would have the same problem. For the first time since takeoff, Jarek allowed himself to breathe. They drifted slowly inside the nebula, engines humming quietly. Saria sat back in her seat, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "We made it." "For now," Jarek said, "but you're right, they'll keep coming." She turned to him, her voice calm but heavy. "We can't run forever. If we don't stop them, they will find me again, and maybe next time you." He looked at her, seeing no fear in her eyes now, only determination. "You have a plan?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, but it is dangerous. We go to my people. If the resistance knows I live, they will fight harder. And with their help, we can end the Syndicate's hunt." "That means flying straight into a war zone," he said. "It means ending this," she replied. Jarek leaned back in his chair, staring at the dim lights of the control panel. He had spent most of his life avoiding war, staying out of other people's fights. But now he was already in the middle of one, and walking away wasn't an option. "Then we find your people." They spent the next few hours inside the nebula, moving carefully so the ship wouldn't take damage. Saria worked on small repairs, her movements precise. She even managed to bring one of the damaged thrusters back online using spare parts. Jarek noticed the focus in her eyes. This wasn't the same quiet, frightened girl he had first seen in that cage. This was someone who had learned to survive, no matter the cost. Eventually, they emerged on the other side of the nebula. The stars were bright again, and the radar began to function. No hunter ships appeared on the screen. Jarek set the course toward the Valari system, glancing at Saria. "Once we get there, your people are going to have questions. You think they'll trust me?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I will tell them the truth. You saved me when no one else would. That will be enough." He wasn't sure if it would, but he didn't argue. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. After a while, she leaned back in her seat, her voice softer. Jarek, when you bought me, I thought you only wanted to own me. I was wrong. He gave her a small, tired smile. I don't own you, Saria. You're free. You stay because you want to. Her lips curved into a faint smile, and for a moment the weight in the air seemed lighter. But both of them knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere out there, the hunters were regrouping, and the next fight would be worse. For now, though, they had a heading, a plan, and each other, and that was enough to keep flying. The stars outside the cockpit shifted as the ship dropped out of high speed. In the distance, a planet came into view, half covered in green forests, half scarred by blackened wastelands. Smoke rose from the surface, drifting high into the atmosphere. Suria's eyes fixed on it, her hands tightening on the armrests. Home, she whispered. Jarek studied the planet. That doesn't look peaceful. It's not, she said quietly. The resistance base is hidden in the forest, but the hunters will be close. They descended through the atmosphere, the ship shaking from the heat of entry. Below them, flashes of light marked battles taking place, blaster fire, explosions, and columns of smoke. Jarek had seen war before, but this was different. It wasn't two armies, it was a desperate fight for survival. He followed Saria's directions, weaving through mountain passes until a section of forest opened to reveal a hidden landing pad. Armed figures surrounded it, weapons raised. As the ship landed, a tall alien male stepped forward, his armor battered but his stance strong. His eyes widened when he saw Saria step out. Princess, he said, his voice breaking. The guards lowered their weapons instantly. Several of them rushed forward, bowing their heads. Saria spoke to them in her language, her voice steady. Jarek couldn't understand the words, but he could feel the weight of them. When she finished, all eyes turned to him. The tall soldier approached. You brought her back. No human has ever done such a thing. Jarek shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. The soldier smiled faintly. You will be honored for this, but first, you must know, the hunters followed you. They are in the skies now. Saria's expression hardened. Then we fight. The base erupted into activity. Fighters were armed, ships prepared for launch, and defenses powered up. Jarek stayed close to Saria, checking his own blaster. He had come here to deliver her to safety, but it was clear that safety didn't exist here. An alarm sounded, and the sky above lit up with red streaks. The hunters had arrived, more ships than before, sleek and deadly. The first wave of enemy fire crashed against the base's shields, making the ground tremble. Saria turned to Jarek. Stay with me. He nodded, following her toward a fortified command post. From there, she issued rapid orders to her people, her calm presence rallying them. Jarek realized she wasn't just a symbol. She was a leader, and they trusted her completely. When the shields finally broke, the battle turned into chaos. Hunters poured in on foot, their weapons cutting through the defenders. Jarek fired alongside the Valari soldiers, each shot dropping an enemy. But for every one they took down, two more seemed to appear. In the middle of the fight, Jarek saw a hunter aiming at Saria. Without thinking, he ran forward, shoving her out of the way. The blaster bolt hit him in the side, knocking him to the ground. Pain burned through him, but he stayed conscious long enough to see Saria kneel beside him, her hands pressing against the wound. No, she said fiercely, you do not die here. She called for help, and two soldiers dragged Jarek to cover while she stood and fought. Her movements swift and precise. The sight of her leading the charge seemed to give her people new strength. They pushed back, driving the hunters toward their ships. By the time the last enemy retreated into the sky, the forest was quiet, except for the crackle of fires. Jarek lay inside a med tent, the wound patched and wrapped. The tall soldier entered, nodding to him. You saved her life. Our people owe you everything. Saria stepped in behind him, her armor scratched and dirt on her face. But her eyes were bright, alive in a way Jarek hadn't seen before. She sat beside him, taking his hand gently. It is over, she said softly. The hunters will think twice before coming again, and my people know the truth, that I live and that I fight. Jarek managed a small smile. Good, means I can finally get some rest. She shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. Rest, yes, but not leave. You are part of this now. He looked at her, confused. Part of what? My life? She said simply. When you bought me, I thought it was the end. But it was the beginning. I belong to you, and you to me, not by chains, but by choice. Jarek didn't know what to say, so he just squeezed her hand. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a place, one worth fighting for. Outside, the sounds of rebuilding had already begun. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And as the twin moons rose over the forest, Jarek knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together.